There is a specific moment this episode is about. You have opened the spreadsheet, or the banking app, or the back of an envelope. The plan is simple. Free up $1,500, maybe $2,000 a month. You go line by line, the mortgage no, the car's under contract. The school signed through June. The insurance is tied to the cars. The childcare is tied to the commute. The commute is tied to the house. 40 minutes later, you have found $140. A streaming service and a gym you stopped attending. Everything else refused to move. Here is the contradiction. On paper, budget shows thousands of dollars of discretionary spending every month. But the moment you reached for that flexibility, it was not there. Tonight, I am going to prove that this is not a discipline problem. Your lifestyle did not simply become expensive. It became load-bearing. And I will show you, piece by piece, how that happened. You carry a quiet belief about your finances, and it is worth stating out loud because you have probably never had to. The belief is this: if things ever got serious, you could cut back. You are not reckless. You know the numbers roughly. You know the house is expensive. The cars are expensive. The activities and the memberships and the services add up. But underneath all of it sits an assumption of reversibility. The spending is a dial, and the dial turns both ways. If income dropped, you would turn it down. If a crisis hit, you would turn it down hard. You have even rehearsed it mentally, the leaner version of your life, the one with one car, fewer commitments, a smaller footprint. It exists in your head as a standing option, a parachute packed and ready. And that belief is not naive. It is how budgets are presented to you. Every budgeting framework, every banking app, every financial article treats your spending as a list of independent line items, each with a delete button next to it. Fixed costs on one side, discretionary on the other, and the discretionary side is yours to command. The entire language of personal finance trimming, cutting, tightening assumes a household that responds to decisions the way a spreadsheet responds to keystrokes. You believe you are one hard conversation away from a cheaper life. That belief feels like prudence. It functions as a reserve you never have to test. And because you never test it, it stays intact right up until the evening you actually need it. So let me put one crack in it. Not a theory, a price list. Take 3 ordinary line items from an ordinary upper-middle-class budget and ask a single question. What does it cost to remove this line today? Not at renewal, not eventually, but now. Start with a leased car. Industry guidance is consistent on this. Terminating a lease early typically means the remaining payments come due, plus a termination fee that commonly runs a few $100s, plus disposition and wear charges. On a lease with 18 months remaining at $400 a month, that is roughly $7,200, plus fees to stop spending money on a car. Brokers who handle these transactions put typical early termination penalties anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 or more. Now take housing. A standard apartment lease break clause runs 1 to 2 months of rent. In expensive markets like New York, early termination provisions of 2 to 3 months rent are common, $5,000 to $7,500 on a $2,500 apartment. And if there is no such clause, you may simply owe rent until a replacement tenant is found. Now take a private school. Most enrollment contracts are written for the full academic year, and many state the obligation plainly: unconditional. Withdraw your child in October, and in a large still owe tuition through June. Schools describe the full year's fees as liquidated damages, agreed in advance. Read those 3 prices again. In each case, the cost of removing the expense is measured in thousands of dollars and months of time. The delete button you imagine next to each line item does not exist. What exists instead is a toll booth, and here is the part to sit with. You did not notice any of those tolls being installed. You sign them in, one reasonable document at a time. The question this raises is uncomfortable, and I am going to leave it open for now. If cutting costs money, what exactly is your flexibility worth, and who priced it? The mechanism has a name: commitment interdependence. And to see it clearly, you have to stop looking at your budget as a list and start looking at it as a structure. A list is a set of independent items. A structure is a set of connected ones. Your budget is presented to you as the first and operates as the second. And the gap between those two things is where the lock lives. Here is how it works. Every significant commitment in your life was made in the context of the commitments before it. You did not choose the house in a vacuum. You chose it partly for the school district. You did not choose the second car in a vacuum. You chose it because two working adults in that house, at that distance from two jobs, could not function with one. The childcare arrangement was built around the commute. The commute was built around the house. The renovation loan was justified by how long you planned to stay, and how long you planned to stay was justified by the school, and the school was the reason for the house. Each decision was locally rational. Each one referenced the others. And that referencing is the mechanism, because a structure where every element supports another element cannot be reduced one element at a time. Remove the second car and the childcare logistics collapse. Change the school and the justification for the house weakens. Sell the house and you unwind the renovation, the district, the commute math, and the social geography of two children simultaneously. What you built, decision by decision, is not a stack of expenses. It is a lattice, and a lattice does not respond to cutting. It responds to unwinding, which is a different operation with a different price. Now, where did this come from? Two places, and only one of them is you. The first is accumulation itself. Complexity in a household grows the way sediment layer is dramatic, and no layer is ever removed because removal is never the default. Adding a commitment requires one signature. Removing one requires notice periods, replacement logistic, and renegotiation with every adjacent commitment. The asymmetry is structural. Addition is frictionless and subtraction is priced. The second origin is commercial, and this is where incentives enter. Over the past 3 decades, the businesses on the other side of your commitments learned to price your exit, not just your entry. This is not a conspiracy. It does not need to be. Retention is simply where the margin is. A leasing company that writes early termination liability into a contract, a landlord who sets a lease break fee at 2 months' rent, a school that defines a full year of tuition as liquidated damages each is independently protecting its own revenue stream against your flexibility. None of them coordinates with the others. But you sit at the center of all of them, and their individually reasonable protections aggregate on your side of the table into a wall. Who profits is therefore not one villain but a category. Every counterparty whose revenue depends on you continuing and whose contract makes discontinuing expensive. Their exit fees are calibrated the same way, high enough to make leaving irrational in any given month, low enough to survive a courtroom. And the calibration has a name inside those businesses: lifetime value. A customer's worth is calculated across the full duration of the relationship, which means every dollar of exit friction is a dollar of protected future revenue. And the contract department is, functionally, a retention department. There is also a second-order effect worth naming, because it compounds the lock quietly. Once the lattice exists, it starts pre-approving new commitments. The third streaming service is easy to justify because the internet package already exists. The second car warranty makes sense because the second car exists. The renovation makes sense because the mortgage exists, and the school exists, and staying is already settled. Interdependence does not just make removal expensive, it makes addition feel cheap, because each new commitment slots into a structure that has already absorbed its justification. The lattice grows in one direction, not because you lack discipline, but because every new piece arrives pre-rationalized by the pieces already in place. And there is a final layer, the one that makes this an emotional lock and not just a financial one. When commitments interlock, cutting stops feeling like arithmetic and starts feeling like demolition. You are no longer asking, can we live without this expense? You are asking, can we survive the chain reaction of removing it? That question is bigger, vaguer, and more frightening, and so the honest answer most households reach is not now, not this month. The complexity does not just raise the exit price. It raises the perceived catastrophe of exiting until the cut that would save you feels like the thing that would break you. Keep one distinction in your pocket for the rest of this episode, because we are going to need it at the end. The difference between a price and an exit price. You have been trained your whole life to evaluate the first. Almost no one taught you to evaluate the second. Let me show you what this looks like inside one household. Rachel is a composite, a constructed illustration assembled from survey data and aggregate household patterns. Not a documented individual, but every number in her story is the kind of number that shows up in real budgets. Rachel is 47. Household income, $260,000. She is a hospital administrator. Her husband is in commercial construction management. 2 children, 13 and 10. The emotional state that defines her year is structural suffocation, the sensation of having money and no room. We start at the end, at the moment of understanding, and trace backward. It is a Tuesday in February. Her husband's firm has cut his role to 4 days a week, a 20% pay reduction, roughly $1,800 a month after tax. Rachel opens the family budget that night, intending to find $1,800 of cuts. By 11 p.m., she has found $180. That is the moment, not panic comprehension. She sits back and understands for the first time that the budget she thought she was managing is not a set of choices. It is a set of contracts. Now trace backward and watch the lattice assemble. 18 months earlier, the kitchen renovation, financed with a $40,000 home equity draw, payments of $410 a month for 10 years. The justification at the time was explicit: we will be in this house at least until the youngest finishes school, so the renovation amortizes over a decade of use. The renovation did not just add a payment, it added a reason to stay. 4 years before that, the second school enrollment. The younger child joined the older one at the same private school, and the contract Rachel signs each spring states that the obligation for the full academic year is unconditional. 2 children, now $31,000 a year, committed each March for the following June. The school was chosen in part because it was 11 minutes from the house. 7 years before that, the house itself, bought when Rachel was 36, chosen for the district, and the commute, a mortgage that consumes $3,400 a month and, more importantly, sits at the center of every subsequent decision. The second car lease followed the house within a year because the house's location made 2 commutes non-negotiable. The current lease runs $520 a month with 19 months remaining, which means, on the night Rachel does the math, ending it early would cost roughly $10,000 in remaining payments, and Fisto eliminate a $500 expense. She writes the number down, looks at it, and crosses out the line. The childcare arrangement, later the after-school programs, were scheduled around those commutes. The gym membership is annual. The alarm system is on a 3-year contract. The landscaping runs seasonally because the neighborhood has expectations Rachel never remembers agreeing to. 11 commitments, assembled over 11 years, each one signed on a day when it was the obviously correct decision. And here is what the backward trace reveals that the forward experience concealed. At no point did Rachel decide to build an $1,800 a month wall around her own flexibility. There was no such decision to point to. The wall is the aggregate shadow of decisions that were each individually about something else: a school, a commute, a kitchen. On that Tuesday in February, Rachel is not looking at overspending. She is looking at architecture. The 4-day week is not resolved by the end of the month. The gap gets covered for now from savings, the account draining at a rate she can calculate precisely and change almost nothing about. That is where we leave her, solvent, employed, educated, and unable to reach her own money. Now widen the lens, because Rachel's lattice is not a personal failure of design. It is the standard architecture of the modern household, and the numbers say so. Research from C+R puts the average American at 12 or more active subscriptions at any given time, with total recurring spending around $219 a month, while the same consumers, when asked, estimate they spend $86. That gap is measured on the smallest, most cancelable category of commitment that exists. Now scale the same blindness up to the categories that actually define a household. Vehicles, housing, education, financing, insurance. If people cannot see the recurring costs that take 2 clicks to cancel, their visibility into commitments guarded by termination clauses is not better. It is worse, because those commitments were designed to be signed once and never re-examined. And notice where households actually do cut when pressure arrives. Deloitte's 2025 media research found that 39% of consumers had canceled a paid streaming subscription within 6 months, the frictionless category, the one with a cancel button. People are not unwilling to cut. They cut what can be cut. The pattern across the data is that reduction flows toward whatever has no exit price, which means the cancelable 10% of the budget absorbs 100% of the adjustment, while the locked 90% sits untouched, not defended, just unreachable. Run a hypothetical, and I will label it as 1. Imagine a household with 10 meaningful commitments, and suppose each counterparty independently adds a modest exit friction, a 2-month fee here, a full-year obligation there, a remaining payments clause, a notice period. No single friction is outrageous. Every one of them would be upheld by a court and defended by a reasonable business argument. But multiply them. If each commitment is even slightly entangled with 2 others, the car with the commute, the school with the house, the number of clean, consequences-free cuts available to that household approaches 0. Not because anyone built a trap, but because 10 rational protections, aggregated on one family's balance sheet, function as a trap. This is the property economists would call emergent. The lock exists at the system level even though no participant built a lock, and the commercial world has every reason to let it emerge. Retention economics runs across sectors now: auto finance, residential leasing, private education, telecom, fitness, home services, and in each sector, the revenue model quietly assumes you will find leaving harder than staying. The contract language proves the assumption. Liquidated damages, unconditional obligation, early termination liability. These are not marketing terms. They are load calculations. Each company is engineering for exactly one thing: that its particular line in your budget survives your next attempt to cut. And when every line is engineered to survive, the budget as a whole becomes something no one intended, and everyone profits from a structure that can absorb income indefinitely and release almost none of it on demand. Which brings us back to the distinction I asked you to hold, the difference between a price and an exit price. You came into this episode with a definition of affordability that you were handed decades ago. Affordable means the monthly payment fits under the monthly income. That definition is the one printed on every offer you have ever signed, and it is incomplete in a way that is not accidental. It measures the cost of entering a commitment and says nothing about the cost of leaving it. So here is the redefinition. The real cost of any commitment is 2 numbers, not 1. What it costs to keep and what it costs to unmake. A $400 car payment with $7,000 of termination liability is not a $400 decision. A $31,000 tuition line that becomes unconditional every March is not a monthly expense. It is an annual, irreversible one that merely bills monthly. And a lifestyle is not the sum of its payments. It is the sum of its exit prices, because the exit prices, not the payments, determine what you can do when circumstances change. This also redefines what flexibility is. You have been treating flexibility as a feeling, the sense that you could cut back if you had to. It is not a feeling. It is a measurable quantity. The amount of monthly spending you can eliminate within 30 days without triggering a penalty, a chain reaction, or a contract. For most households, that number is a fraction of what they believe it is. And the gap between believed flexibility and actual flexibility is precisely the gap Rachel fell into on a Tuesday night in February. Nothing in her budget was unaffordable by the old definition. Nearly all of it was unreachable by the new one. The redefinition also changes how every future offer reads. The next contract that crosses your desk will show you one number prominently, in the largest font on the page, the monthly price. The second number, the one that determines whether this commitment will someday stand between you and your own money, will be in the section nobody reads, written in language nobody enjoys. That placement is not a formatting choice. It is a measure of which number they need you to weigh and which one they need you to skip. And understand what this means about the moment of crisis, because this is the coldest part. The exit prices do not present themselves when you sign. They present themselves when something breaks: a job, a marriage, a diagnosis, which means the bill for your complexity arrives at the exact moment you are least equipped to pay it. The structure holds perfectly in good weather. That was never the test. The test is the Tuesday in February, and by then the structure has been setting for years. So look at your own lattice tonight. Not to cut it, just to see it. Count the lines you could remove within 30 days, and notice how that number feels. Because the most dangerous debt isn't on your credit card. It's the life you borrowed. A question for the comments, and be honest before you type. Which single commitment in your life would be the most expensive to walk away from? And did you know its exit price when you signed? One last thing before you go. Every contract in your lattice left a record when you signed it, and there is a system that has been quietly collecting those records for your entire adult life, one that never forgets a single decision you have made. Next time, we look at what it does with them.